Hi kids, today we're traveling back in time to learn about the story of Louis Riel and the Métis people who stood up to protect their land, culture and rights. Let's go all the way back to 1816, the Battle of Frog Plain, named by the Métis people, or Seven Oaks, that was named by the Canadian public. This was a battle when the Métis people first stood their ground as a united Métis nation. Back then, Canada wanted to claim all the land west to the Pacific Ocean, partly because they were worried the USA might try to take over. To secure this land, Canada bought a huge territory from the Hudson Bay known as Rupert's Land, also known as the Métis homeland to the Métis. But this didn't sit well with the Métis as they were not asked what their thoughts were. The Métis people who lived in Fort Garry felt left out. Canada offered land to people who would move west and settle. Settlers from Ontario and overseas started moving west to the Promised Land, and the Métis had no say in it whatsoever. They worried about losing their lands and control and authority over their community and way of life. That's when a young Métis man named Louis Riel was asked to step up. He was highly educated and was asked to lead the Métis in stopping surveyors who were mapping out Métis land without permission. Riel quickly became the secretary of the Métis National Committee, organizing the first official resistance on Frog Plains. To make sure Métis voices were heard, Riel created a provisional government, and in it created a Bill of Rights for all people of Manitoba, First Nations, French, and the Métis. This eventually led to the Manitoba Act in 1870, which promised to protect Métis lands and culture. But Riel's journey didn't end there. The act was since been used by provincial governments as the basis for their governments. So a man named Thomas was sent out by the Canadian government to overthrow the Métis government. In his aggression, he was tried, convicted, and executed. The government of Canada did not take kindly to this and placed a bounty on Riel. Consequently, Riel went into exile in the United States. However, once again in 1884, Métis leaders in Saskatchewan went to Riel in Montana and begged him to come and help them with the land claims in Saskatchewan. Riel tried to resolve things peacefully by writing their demands to the government of Canada, but this was met with hostility and military was sent to settle the disagreement, to which the Métis took offense and challenged the military, several times in fact at Fish Creek and Duck Lake, leading to the Métis resistance and defeat at the Battle of Batoche. Louis Riel surrendered to save further killing of the Métis men. Riel was put on trial, but not by his peers, but by foreigners, and was convicted of treason. Despite protests and appeals, he was sentenced to death on November 16, 1885. Riel was hanged in Regina. Following Louis Riel's hanging, the Métis people faced an increase in prejudice in Western Canada. So Lucas is here to talk more about that with you. Take it away, Lucas.
Thanks, Bryan. Let's take a look at what happened to the Métis people after the Northwest Resistance. This is a story of resilience, but also of tough challenges for many communities. Let's start with Gabriel Dumont, a Métis general in the Métis Resistance. He refused to surrender. He escaped to Montana and worked in a Wild West show as a sharpshooter with Wild Bill Hickok. Later, Dumont returned to Canada. From there, he was a political speaker in French-Canadian nationalist circles. After that, he received land scrip in 1893 where he farmed and trapped. After the resistance, things got even harder for the Métis. Their homes were destroyed, lands confiscated, and racial discrimination became an everyday attack on the Métis. They were now orphans in their homelands. Eventually, the government was forced to make some form of compensation and created fraudulent money and land scrip which they gave to the Métis families not involved in the resistance. But speculators bought most of it, leaving the Métis again without land. They became squatters on Crown land and farmers' lands. These were called road allowance. Métis children faced barriers in public and residential schools as well. Because they weren't landowners, they couldn't attend regular schools. Some went to Catholic residential schools, but families had to pay for their children to attend, which left many children without schooling. It seemed society was determined to punish the Métis for refusing to surrender their lands and property. Over time, there were some government attempts to help, like the industrial farms in the 1930s, but these programs didn't work out and were filled with unsavory characters doomed to fail. Real change came from the Métis leaders who fought for their rights, leading to securing lands for the homeless Métis, which were called colonies at the time, but eventually changed to the Métis Betterment Act in 1938, and today it is referred to as the Métis Settlements Act. Nationally, Riel's execution led to tensions in Quebec as well, as Métis were considered of French ancestry. Louis Riel's grandfather was from Quebec. The conflict helped speed up the completion of the Canadian Pacific Railway, which helped Canada take control of the West. All of these losses had lasting effects on the Métis, leaving them marginalized for generations. However, their ability to retain their identity, culture, and political advocacy has been crucial in shaping the Canada that we know today. Lastly, we are going to talk about the impact Louis Riel currently has on the Métis. And to help me teach this, I have Eli Aikins here with me.
Hi everyone. So as Bryan told you earlier, Riel was hanged over 100 years ago, but he's now seen as a hero and martyr taking a stand for the Métis rights. His death made him a symbol of their struggle for the land's rights and eventually recognition in the 1982 Canada Constitution. Riel also stood up for minority rights, French and Indian, as that's what the First Nations were referred to back then, and valued cultural diversity, something super important in Canada today. He wanted Métis, Indigenous, and other communities to be treated fairly. You'll see Riel remembered in many ways today. There are statues, commemorations, and even a public holiday in Manitoba. He's honored as the first leader of Manitoba, father of Confederation, and recognized in communities and schools across Canada. For the Métis today, Riel is a symbol of Métis identity, strength, resilience, and intelligence. He's an inspiration to the Métis Nation of Alberta, who have begun the creation of a new self-government model. They're building a future based on Riel's ideas in equality, unity, and fairness. Riel once said, "We must cherish our inheritance, we must preserve our nationality for the youth of our future. The story should be written down to pass on." These words remind the Métis people to protect their heritage and pass it down to future generations, like you, and encourage all cultures to be proud of who you are. So Riel's story didn't end with his life. He's a lasting symbol of integrity, honor, justice, and equality in Canada for all people, and especially the Métis. Thanks for listening and learning with us today.